But tonight I'm sick of the whole affair. I want free life and I want fresh air. And I sigh for the canter after the cattle, the crack of the whips like shots in battle, the melee of hooves and horns and heads that wars and wrangles and scatters and spreads.
All right, Mr. Stephen Klatt, thank you for joining me in the den.
You're welcome.
I've been looking forward to this conversation since I had a meeting with you earlier this week, and I didn't know you. Just met you. I met you probably a couple weeks ago at our inaugural service in Alice, Texas. We just acquired a church out there. We started doing ministry. We had an inaugural service. So many people of the community came out. We had a packed house. You were amongst the crowd, and we kind of briefly met. And you told me you had some that you could share plenty of stories, and I didn't know what that meant. So I said, I'm gonna have to meet with Mr. Klatt, and I got your number, but I don't know what I was looking for it under, but I couldn't find it. Then I ran into Mr. Noel Atkinson, and I mentioned you, and he said, Klatt. I said, that was his last time I looked, and I found your number, gave you a call. We met up a few days ago in Alice, and we had a conversation. It was a great conversation, great blessing. And I said, you got to be on my podcast, and thank you for agreeing to do that.
Well, this is something totally new for me, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Never been on a podcast?
No, never have.
You know what it is, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
It's been around for a while, but it's gaining a lot of traction. I think there's millions of podcasts now, and for me, it was a blessing to start it. I had been wanting to do it, and it's just eventually we got going, and I'm loving it. I look forward to it. Just meeting people and getting to pick their brains and just kind of learning something new every time we have it. So you are, where does the name Klatt come from? What's the history in your name?
Okay, well, I got to explain something.
Okay.
Klatt is the English pronunciation of a German name.
In German, it's probably Klatt or something.
It's pronounced Klott.
Okay.
And so that was always the thing. My dad was a Klatt. I am a Klott. He gave up on the German pronunciation through his business a long time ago.
Okay.
But my dad's ancestors came from Germany.
Germany. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that where those blue eyes come from?
Well, no. I think everybody tells me my blue eyes came from my mother.
Okay. And your mother was?
My mother was Inez Gorbit, and there's kind of a deal back and forth. Was that British or was that French or something? I'm not exactly sure what that lineage was. And then my dad's mother, her ancestors were from Ireland, and they were some of the original colonists for the San Patricio de Cabreña colony, McGlone and McMullen.
Really?
And I'm very fortunate. I'm the fifth generation on some of that same land.
Okay.
And we're talking about in the town of San Patricio, the town they named the county after. Commonly referred to by people nowadays as Old San Pat. But it was the original county seat of San Patricio County. And back in those days, in the early days of the Republic of Texas, everything south of the Nueces River was San Patricio County. But then as things developed, it got broken up and everything. And so, but that's where the land is now.
The McGlone. I'm familiar with the McGlone Ranch.
The McGlone and McMullen. McMullen was his partner, and he went to San Antonio, and he was a merchant in San Antonio, And one of the famous stories was that he was murdered in San Antonio. And his partner McGlone was at his house there in San Patricio that's still there. And an image appeared to him of McMullen, bloodied. And so he immediately got on his horse and rode like the wind. And when he got to San Antonio, he found that his partner had been murdered.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
So you think God was showing him something?
It's one of those things, and so to have land in the McMullen land grant. Of course, these were the impresarios, the land agents for Mexico. This when Texas was still owned by Mexico, the initial Anglo colonization of Texas. You had to get a grant in the McMullen San Patricio de Jabreno land grant, you had to be an Irish Catholic. Of course, back then, all landowners in Mexico had to be Catholics. But in this particular deal, at land grant, you had to be an Irish Catholic. You couldn't be an American. And so my ancestors had come to America, but they had not, I guess, become Americans yet. And so and they saw the opportunity, like so many did, for free land, and they came to Texas.
So what was the grant? How many acres, or what exactly were they giving?
I'm not exactly sure what that. I couldn't quote exactly how many acres and all that kind of stuff.
And they gave it.
Yeah, you came and you occupied it for so long, and you got the title to it.
Wow,
is how that worked. And so, I believe my ancestors, they came to Texas, and one of the things was my great grandfather. He was a young man. He and one of his uncles had gone, and they got in trouble with the law in Ireland. And the charge was that they had fired a shot on a private estate. Okay, well, right, what really were they doing? Okay, well, obviously they were poaching, but they didn't have a game. They didn't have an animal that they had shot, but they knew they had fired a shot. So that's why they were charged with firing a shot on a private estate. And the uncle that my young great-grandfather was with, his punishment was, his conviction, he was exiled to Australia. Australia was a British penal colony. And my great-grandfather said, hey, I got passage to America. And they said, have a fine trip.
Go ahead.
Okay, and so he gets lined up, and lo and behold, everybody's getting registered, and you just don't immediately leave. They get booking the passage and stuff, and he meets a woman whose husband and her son had booked passage, but before the ship could leave, her husband died. Mm. And so they said, sorry, we don't let unaccompanied women and children make that passage. And so, convenience, they married. Mm. And so, this was months. It wasn't just 1, 2, 3 days. This is over months. They're getting all lined up and everything. And lo and behold, as she's making the passage, they're making the passage, she's with child. They come to America, they come around, and back then New Orleans was a huge port.
Mm-hmm.
And so they came to New Orleans, and they stayed in New Orleans long enough for my great-grandfather to be born. Mm. And so then they continued on to Texas. Mm. So my great-grandfather was from Ireland. My great-great-grandfather was from Ireland. My great-grandfather was born in New Orleans.
All right.
Okay, so they came to San Patricio, and my great-great-grandfather was the 5th sheriff of San Patricio County. And so my great-grandfather, when he was 19 years old, Civil War was going on. And he was a member of the local militia. Well, the story was that there was a local guy. The Yankees had blockaded the coast to keep the South from shipping cotton and getting resupplied and stuff. So out on the coast, there was a blockade of ships. Well, there was a local guy. He would steal cattle, drive them to what's now Flower Bluff, drive them across to Padre Island, butcher them, and sell the meat to the Yankees that were blockading the coast. Well, the local militia went to stop him, and there was a skirmish. And there was about 14 or so guys in the local militia unit. They only had 9 guns, and only 6 of them functioned. And so they're out there in the dunes of Padre Island, and they know each other, and everybody's calling back and forth, and shots are made. And anyway, still in Corpus, a prominent family, the Dunns, a young man, Lawrence Dunn, he was shot in the neck, and he wound up dying. My great-grandfather was shot in the lung, but he survived. My grandmother, and so he survived, later got married, had 6 children. His wife died. He remarried, had 9 more. My grandmother, my dad's mother, was his youngest. And so I'm asking her, she's 90-something years old. When I hear about this, I find out about this, and I ask her, what? And she had no idea. She had never heard that. And I said, well, okay, how old was your dad when he died? Oh, he's like 85. What did he die of? Well, Mama said that the doctor said he ate too much beef. I said, okay, when he was 19, he was shot in the lung. Did that ever hinder him? My grandmother said, well, he was riding horseback the day he died, and he wound up having 15 kids, so it must have not hindered him very much.
How did you find out all this information?
In talking with people and making, just by chance making contact with people, and then they told me about the story, and they told me that you can go to La Rotara Library and find this certain book, and it tells in there. It didn't mention my great-grandfather, but it mentioned a young man from San Patricio. Okay, and so then in my great-grandmother's obituary, it mentions that happened to him.
Wow.
So in family research, and we have records that go back a long time. Mm-hmm. And I refer to him as the family archives. Mm-hmm. And so in going back through there, you learn.
Most people don't take the time to look into their history and their past. You recommend that?
Yes. And see, one of my great uncles, I was named after him. he came to live with us for a number of years before he died. He was like my 78-year-old brother. And man, he was a World War I veteran. He had been gassed, and he lived, born in the early 1890s. So he lived through everything. And so when I'm studying history, he would tell me, well, that's not how it was, let me tell you. And so,
Yeah. So what do you think you gained by being able to learn all this stuff about your history and your lineage or ancestry?
Well, it's an understanding of who I am, where I come from.
Right.
And of course, they were devout Roman Catholics, and I was raised Roman Catholic and everything. And so some wise fella said a long time ago that if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going. If you don't know history, and so, and the fact that I'm on that same land, when I was 5 years old, my great uncle told me, someday this is all going to be yours. And I hung on every word he said, and I said, okay. Well, then about 3 years before my dad died, he said, one day this is all going to be yours. And I went, yeah. And he goes, well, what do you think of that? And I said, well, I've known that since I was a little kid. I'm just waiting for y'all to, go along with it, Yeah. And so I'm really lucky. I'm blessed with that and that heritage. But then, okay, that's local. But then, okay, now I can't neglect or not recognize on my mother's side. Okay. My mother's dad, so my grandfather, his grandfather bought land grant number 99 from Stephen F. Austin.
Really?
And so, and I've, so Anglo-wise, I have some of the deepest roots in Texas that you can have. And I've become acquainted and friends with, many Hispanics, but their ancestry goes further, back to Spain and stuff and all. And so, and I honor that too.
Yeah.
But so I have deep roots in love for Texas and
that's
and that heritage and then also religion too.
Yeah.
And stuff.
You mentioned land grants. I have a ranch out here in the Bembo area. And when you look at the tracts out there, most of them are broken into like 80-acre tracts. And I've talked to my neighbor out there, and his grandpa, I think it was his grandpa, was able to get one of those tracts or a few of those tracts on those grants. And I'm wondering what was necessary to qualify for these grants, and how has that affected the possession of that land through generations? Or the ability for other people to get land that was just given, right?
Yeah.
And I'm over here like, please sell it to me.
Okay. But all right now, then, so, you think about it, Mexico, well, you had Spain first, and then Mexico got their independence from Spain. And then, okay, so they had all this land in Texas, Well, why did they want Anglo colonization?
To occupy it?
To occupy it. The reason was because they were fed up with and tired of the Comanches slaughtering them. And they wanted a buffer between their people and the dreaded Comanches.
Is that the tribe that was out here?
Well, you start what we would say the hill country and West Texas all the way up through the Panhandle, Oklahoma. that was really Comancheria was, and they controlled. They were the ones.
Wasn't the coast over here, like the bay, wasn't the Karankawas on that area?
You had the Karankawa Indians along the coast, and they were notorious about being vicious and stuff. And there was a whole bunch of tribes of indigenous people that we called Indians.
Yeah, one thing I remember about the Karankawas, and I might be wrong, but this is something that, for whatever reason, I remember the Karankawas by, is that they were tall. Is that correct? They were tall Indian tribes.
They were tall, and they had the reputation of being cannibals. And but because they lived on the coast, and okay, what do we find in the coast and areas? Mosquitoes. But what they did for mosquitoes is they took fish and they rubbed fish on them, and that was their pesticide.
They're off.
They're off. And all. So,
really, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, so it's.
So there was the Karankawas, and then there was the Comanches a little bit further inland, or
yeah, and then there's
it seems kind of close, huh? For
that was other tribes, but the Comanches had come down from the plains, and they were the big menace for.
Were there any Mexican tribes that you know of in this area, like the Aztecs or Mayans? Did they stretch up this high?
Well, now, boy, the range of the Mayans is amazing, but we're going way back in history.
Pre Native American type Comanches and all that, or what?
Well, there was indigenous people here for a long time, but Mayans. That when the Spanish European explorers came, that started the end of the
Mayans,
the Mayans and the Aztecs and the tribes. And
so then more of the Native Americans, North American Indians, maybe kind of migrated down here a little bit.
And see, when the Spanish came, of course they brought the horse, and that was. That
game changer,
big game changer. And so some of the indigenous people, we'll say Indians, they trained them how to take care of horses. Okay, but that was the Spanish wanted. They wanted to control that knowledge, and the control of knowledge goes as far back as recorded history. People in power wanted to control knowledge. Okay, well, the Spanish wanted to control the knowledge of how to use horses. Well, some of the Indians that they trained, that learned how, well, then they got away, and then they started and the horses started multiplying, and you had the Mustangs. And so the Comanches learned, and the Comanches became one of the best mounted cavalries that history had. And the way that they could ride the horses and shoot their bows and stuff and everything,
experts.
They were experts, and so then, and they were deadly. They could unleash a quiver full of arrows. And when the Spanish and thus the Anglos, you had those single shot rifles that took a few minutes to reload in one shot and reload, where the Indians could unleash a quiver full of arrows on you. So then what made a huge improvement in that warfare was the revolver, the repeating rifle. Okay, well then
It's hard to compete.
That changed the game. But then the Indians got a hold of that too, and so then things got it. That's a whole different. That's a whole thing.
So when they were giving away those grants out here in South Texas, I'm assuming that there wasn't that many Hispanics in the area that would be able to take advantage of those grants, or were they just not given the opportunity? Because I mean, really, I'm assuming that was just like remote land and nobody was.
Well, no, most of, but see, there were Spanish land grants, and the viceroys and the King of Spain, through the power, they got huge land grants and stuff, and so that was, that was something. And people came and took the land and overpowered them or bought it, or they came and occupied, whatever.
Yeah, I've been on the McGlowan Ranch. It's a beautiful ranch. Even when you go down to the Nueces River that runs through there, like you almost don't recognize it that it's the Nueces River. It's really nice, and I guess it's clean running through there and stuff. But you live on the McGlowan Ranch?
No.
No.
We have our own property. We have a little stretch of property that's on the river. But then we have some other property out from there.
And you have cattle?
I have cattle, and I also have some land that's in cultivation. I lease that out to professional farmers.
Okay.
That take care of that. And a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, my dad made a contract with the guys, and they put in some wind turbines.
Oh, okay.
And
what do you think about that?
It's mixed emotions, about that, but
I'm not a fan.
Well,
I start driving out in those areas, and I love the way the brush country looks out there, and then you see all these wind turbines everywhere and these windmills, and it's like,
and they're not silent.
No,
they make noise.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was funny when they started putting them in down here by the coast, that the environmentalist people would complain that the bats from up around San Antonio in the hill country. The story is that these millions of these bats come out every night, and they fly to the coast to eat mosquitoes and stuff, and then by dawn they fly back, and that the wind turbines that they're going to hit them, and they'll run into them. Bats have this
ultrasonic
thing, and so they're, you don't think they're going to see this thing that's 400 feet in the air? No, come on.
It's other type of birds that are getting kind of affected by that, though, huh?
They say that, I don't.
I hear it's like it's not worth the hassle to have those things, and that it costs more to put them up than the energy or that they're producing. Like they don't really.
I've heard that, and then once they've done their service course, that you can't recycle the material.
Really.
And so I don't.
Well, I also hear like their government contracts, so people are making some money off of that. We can't go too far into that, or they'll pull us off the air. They'll take down the episode.
Anyway.
It's probably correct though. But so one of the things that caught my attention about you is that you're a storyteller. And I think you said you go to or at least you used to at some point go to weddings and different events where you told stories and poems. And
So I okay. Well, my dad pointed this out to me a long time ago. My last name, Klatt, If you spell it backwards, it spells talk.
Talk.
Okay, so
You were destined to talk.
So I'm right there, you know.
Yeah.
And then I've always enjoyed good stories, you know. And I mean, you know, where's that come from? Well, you know, ever since I was a little kid, you know, I heard great stories from the Bible.
Mm.
And then I'd hear my ancestors, my great aunts, great uncles, great grandparents, and stuff tell about old days and those stuff. So I've always enjoyed stories and all. And so it was a number of years, and I always, you know, like talking and listening to people. Of course, I grew up when kids were seen, not heard.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so you had to listen. And I wish I could remember some of the old things that, you know, that they talked about. But so I you know, and I had a great relationship with my dad. He's my dad. I loved him.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things we always used to watch, Johnny Carson.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like millions of other people did. Well, one night I'm watching Johnny Carson, and this guy, and they have these cowboy poets. Oh, what's this, you know? And so this guy comes on, and he's from Wyoming. He's never been more than 50 miles from where he was born in his life. And now he's in Burbank, California on the Johnny Carson show. And he tells a poem about a famous bull rider riding a famous bull in the National Finals Rodeo. I knew of the event, but to hear this guy tell it in verse as a poem, but not only did he tell it as a poem, he had his standard classic metal folding chair. He turned that chair around, sat on it backwards, and he acted it out. And I was fascinated by it. And probably 2-3 years after this, just by chance, I'm in a bookstore, and I see this little paperback book, Classic and Contemporary Cowboy Poetry. And I pick it up, and I look through there, and that poem was there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my gosh, man. So I buy the book, and I'm reading that, and I'm reading these other poems. And I tell you what, they are so real, you can smell it.
Mm.
And I went, man, this is great. Man. Oh, I love this, man. And I would emerge into it. I was there. I could feel it. I could smell it. This is great. Okay, but I was a terrible oral reader. I didn't have the self-confidence to do that. I wouldn't dare do that. Oh, you know. So I wanted to share these stories share this with family, friends, everything. And I wouldn't dare read it to them. And it was different that, here, read this. You'll like this.
Right.
But if I could recite it,
mm-hmm.
I could tell this. And so I was blessed with the ability to do it. And why do I have that ability to do it? When I was going to school, in a Catholic school, we had to memorize all kinds of prayers,
mm-hmm.
spelling, multiplication tables. You memorized everything. I was an altar boy when the Mass was in Latin. You had to memorize that. And just when you got that down real good, they changed it. They switched to English.
Uh-huh.
So, you had to memorize that.
In English.
And so, drawing back from that foundation thing, I'm blessed with the ability to memorize. But these poems, they touch my heart, and so I learned them, and then I could recite them. And the more I read, the more I found. I'd find these ones. They would touch my heart. I would memorize them. I would share them with others. And the first time I ever did it to recite to anyone was at a family reunion, and I knew 3 poems that I could recite, and I could get 3/4 of the way through the poem, and then I had to read just one line. So I had my note set. Mm-hmm. And then once I got past that point, well, okay, it was downhill smooth after that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm doing this and in front of cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff. And as I'm doing this, they're all looking at me. And I'm going, why they looking at me like that? I'm thinking to myself, and I go, well, I can't run out the door. I gotta go through this. And so anyway, when I finished, they just sat there and looked. Some of them slack-jawed, and I'm going, what? And they're going, we never heard you talk so fast in your life. Well, I was scared, I was nervous, And so anyway, I learned those, and I learned others. I come across them. I would hear somebody. I would find it, and that would lead me to another book, and I'd find somebody's book, or I'd buy their tape or something and read it. And so when I was at my best, I knew 40 poems by heart. And I can't write anything. And I'm terrible about remembering names of who wrote it. Mm-hmm. But so I started arranging them where the subject or the topic or the character in one would kind of lead into the next one, and it would just kind of flow. And I started doing this. I got an opportunity to do it at some cowboy events at the college at A&I or A&M now in Kingsville, and then somebody heard me there, and they invited me to George West Story Fest, and I went to George West Story Fest, and the audience loved me, and I loved them, and I was a star up there for a number of years. I made the TV commercials for them and everything. It was great. It was a wonderful place to tell stories. It was a wonderful place to perform because the audience, they gave themselves to you as soon as you stepped up.
Yeah.
And so it was pointed out to me that, get the audience with you quick and leave them wanting more. Because, and somebody observed, they said, because once you see the audience is with you, well, then you
relax.
You relax and you're so much better. And so somebody saw me there, or heard me there, and then they asked me to go here and to go there and here and there. And it was all word of mouth kind of thing. And I used to go, I did over 400 performances, presentations, I say, in all of various events. I mean, all the civic clubs, back then, real active was Lions Club, Rotary Club, Optimus Clubs. They want somebody to come to their luncheon and talk to them. Churches, weddings, garden clubs, funerals, all kind. I mean,
some of the content in the poems that you've learned, I'm assuming, have a lot of history, and they give a sense of the antiquity of old America or even Western life.
Yeah, but then there's a message in a bunch, in several of them. And that's what draws me to them. And I'm just sharing. Like I said, I didn't write any of this, and it's touched my heart, and it's an honor and a privilege to be given the opportunity to touch other people's hearts. And mean, I know I have introduced this cowboy poetry to hundreds of people. I had a cousin that was a professor at the University of New Mexico, and his doctoral thesis was the linguistics of Swahili. He was a word guy. He was a language guy. And when he heard me, he was just amazed. And he goes, "So you did?" I said, no. I'm just repeating this.
What did he hear?
Well, the poems that I had recited. And so that lit the fire for him to research more. And I found out through his siblings that they said, "Oh my God, I mean, you know, he did all kind of stuff. And,
Created a monster.
and you lit a fire for him."
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe, I mean, I didn't go to college. I'm not educated. And here he is. He's got his doctorate. And I
What is
influenced
one
him.
that he heard from you?
Well, one of the early ones that I started reciting was I'd have to, let's see which ones do I. Well, let me. He heard several, but okay. Let me let me start like I used to start a presentation. We've come too late to ride with the great, but we're born with a sense of our history. And the challenge remains to pick up the reins and answer our personal mystery. Well, I'll tell you about a fellow that answered his personal mystery. His name was Ham McCordy. Now, Ham McCordy bought a quarter section of leftover sandy land, cleared it of post oak, blackjack, scratchbriar, and prickly pear, built a log cabin with 2 chimneys, sodded a Bermuda grass pasture, dug a 90-foot well, set out a peach orchard and put up barbed wire fences, irrigated a big vegetable garden, filled in the gully, and paid off the mortgage, all in 10 years. He was showing Levi Tutwiler, the traveling preacher, around his place and was pointing out the things that he had done. "Brother Ham," the preacher protested, "you shouldn't say that you have done these things. You should say that you and the Lord have done them." "Well, I reckon you're right," Ham allowed. "But preacher, you should have seen this place when the Lord had it by himself." And this is what it was probably like when Brother Tutwiler was first starting out. In a western town in days of old, before the mine closed down for lack of gold, folks there seized opportunity and built themselves a right smart community. They built them a school where the R's were taught. They built them a church on the corner lot. They painted her white with steeple high to greet the townsfolk as they passed by. They had a judge, a sheriff, and a mayor, but they needed a preacher to make things square. So they sent back east, as was the general rule, and hired themselves one fresh from divinity school. When Sunday come, he was all decked out to preach his sermon, whisper and shout. But when he stepped out to the podium, it was all too obvious no one had come, except for one old cowboy in a pew back there in his Sunday shirt and greased down hair. He sat there quiet, just watching the floor, with an occasional glance toward the church's door. Time stood still for the longest while, till the preacher coughed, then faked a smile. I guess we'll try again next week." But emotion reigned. He could hardly speak. His demeanor was that of a scalded pup. He turned to leave when old Jake spoke up. "Now hold on there, parson. It tain't your fault, and them there doors ain't like no vault, 'cause it ain't locks what keeps folks out, and if you don't preach now, Satan has won the bout." If I was to haul out a whole load of hay and only one cow showed, she'd get fed that day. Well, in the past few days, this preaching man had found it hard to cope with the Western ways. But he figured he had found his call from this profound man with a Western drawl. So he fixed his collar and stood up straight and commenced to expound on the pearly gates. He shocked himself at his own recall of the book he waved, chapter, verse, and all. It was God Almighty's omnipotent power that he lectured on for near an hour. Then the wages of sin and hell's brim fire, and he didn't weaken and he didn't tire. He was yelling and screaming and pounding the floor when he noticed old Jake wasn't awake anymore. This made him mad, and he stomped to the pew, shook Jake by the shoulder, and said, I'm not through. You're the one that told me about cow getting fed, and here you're acting like you're home in bed. Well, that's right, preacher, the things I told you, and if I'd a load of hay, it'd still stand true. That cow would get fed, 'tis the cowboy's code, but I wouldn't feed her the whole darn load.
I love it.
So, and then my dad would remind me that one of my great aunts would always say this about going to church. Whenever I pass the church, I stop in for a visit, so that when they carry me in, the Lord won't ask, "Who is it?"
That's unfortunately the case for many people. I love these stories because they're telling truths, right, in a way that can be kind of cemented in our hearts and minds, huh?
And speaking of the Lord, I dreamt God came last night, and heaven's gate swung wide. With kindly grace, an angel ushered me inside. Much to my astonishment stood friends I had known on earth. Some I'd labeled unfit and of having little worth. Angry words came to my lips, but never were set free. For everyone showed stunned surprise. No one expected me.
I can't be surprised with nobody else. Right? I'm here. Yeah, that's awesome.
So, like that, like those, there's a little message to it, but there's a little sense of humor.
Absolutely.
And
I think humor brings down the walls and the barriers that we create from allowing truth to come in, right? Or allowing a message from God to come in. Humor kind of just causes all those things to subside, and God is able to speak to us. Because what you have, I believe, is a gift. I think everybody has a particular gift in them that God uses to accomplish his will and to speak to others. And I think what you have is a gift of God. Would you say that?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I would do a presentation, and it would be 30, 35 minutes or so after dinner, and I have no notes. It's all from my head and from my heart, and people would notice this, and they would go, "My gosh, how can you do this?" And I was asked so much, and they were sincere about wanting to know how I did this. Did you learn this in college? No, kind of junior high speech class, and so I had to give a legitimate reason for it, and it's all somebody else's words, and so I used somebody else's reason how they did it, and it fit perfectly. It's with talent on loan from God.
Mm-hmm.
And like I've said, it's an honor and a privilege to be given the opportunity to touch people's hearts. And in my presentations, I've given, and sure, I've made people laugh, but there's a couple of poems that I tell that, make you swallow hard and
mm-hmm.
squeeze tears out of your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to a group one morning, and this one big stout man, he openly wept at this story, and as I'm noticing this, I'm thinking, oh man, I pulled too hard on his heart, you know. And after it was over with, my God, he gave me the bear hug. It almost broke my ribs. And he was so grateful because he related to that story so much. And so, again, it's touching people's hearts, you know. I had met a friend, and we got along great. And it was something. And then right after that, man, I found this poem that just captured our relationship. And it's called A Rare Find. It's a wonderful thing, though it's hard to explain. When you meet a new friend on your way, and in no time you find the reason behind the ease that your friendship obtains. For your spirits are one, though your friendship's begun only just a few hours ago. And the things that you share and the feeling that's there is more lasting and precious than gold. Well, your talk runs from cattle to horses to shoeing to starting these colts a new way. And before your own eyes, the time has flown by. Adios is the thing you now say. But you sure hate to go, and your feelings they show on your face as you shake your friend's hand. But you know you've been lucky to find this new friend who shares your same love for the land, for horses and cattle, and days in the saddle, and nights underneath a clear sky. A oneness in spirit that goes beyond words. We share that, my new friend and I. As I lift up my head from my old canvas bed, I thank the good Lord for his care. And for my new friend, may we soon meet again, for I know we have much more to share. You see, our spirits are one, though our friendship's begun only just a few hours ago. And the things that we share and the feeling that's there is more lasting and precious than gold. I was once criticized by my ex that I'm too emotional. Okay, well, I get that from my mother. I know that, you know, and I can get into this because all of this is in my heart. It's touched my heart, and yeah, I mean, hell, I got tears running down my eyes right now thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm assuming the ones that you quote are the ones that have touched your heart in some way, personal experience you can relate to more.
And that's when you know, when I say I can smell it. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you know, you think about it's one way of expressing how deep and how real it is to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get but no, man, can you smell it? Mm-hmm. And I used to. I'm from Alice, and so a number of times a man in Alice would hear me, and it got to where, no matter in the room, at the banquet or the meeting or whatever it was, he would pick. But when I stepped up to the podium, he'd pick up his chair. He'd come through the people, and he would set his chair right in front of the podium. And then he would sit there and he'd fold his arms and he'd put his head back and close his eyes. And he wouldn't move. The whole time I talked, he wouldn't move until I finished. And my mother saw him do this one time, and she goes, "How rude." And I said, "No, Mother, no." I said, "I'm painting that picture in his mind. He's there."
Yeah.
And so I told him, I said, "Bill, you pay me a great compliment by doing that." And he goes, "I'm there." He says, "I can smell it." And when he said, "I can smell it," I said, "Oh, yes. Yeah, we're there, man." And
even your voice reminds me when I was little, I used to watch those little cowboy movies, and there's a narrator, you know, talking about this, that, or the other. And it really takes me there. And a lot of the stories, you know, for whatever reason, when we're children, you know, there's a lot of impression in our hearts that is made in that time in your life. And when stories take you there, that's powerful.
even like I said, I was a terrible reader, and all. I really didn't get turned on, enthusiastic about reading until after I'd gotten out of high school, and because then I found some books, some subjects that it captured me, and it was really regional, local Texas history and stuff, and so I would read, and friends that I was with or something, they would notice it would take me 10, 15 minutes to turn a page. And they used to tell me, they said, "My God, you're the slowest reader I've ever seen in my life." I said, "No, because I'm there. I'm
capturing it.
I'm in it, man. I'm in it." And so that led into this and everything.
Something like what you have could have been missed because of how education is set up. It's designed to teach a certain way. You told me that you're more of an auditory learner, and that's not necessarily catered to too much. And I believe that we've got to find different ways to teach so we can pull out those gifts that are inside of people that are not necessarily going to come out in traditional ways of teaching or learning.
I realized it on my own. And then, years later, I started a relationship with an elementary educator, and I'm explaining this and everything, and she commented, "Oh yeah, you're an auditory learner," and I'd never heard that, and I'm thinking, okay, look, I'm trying to be nice, and you're calling me names that I don't know what that is, So, and anyway, it was explained to me, and okay, I learned how. I learned about it.
So you said the storytelling kind of pulls the history, and when we learn the history, even you searching your history, I think that kind of helps you tell the stories that you tell. But you said if you don't know your history, you don't know where you're going. So the history that you've accumulated and this gift that you're now using, or that you've been using to tell these stories, where do you feel like they're taking us now?
I don't know about taking us, but I can only answer for myself, and it's a greater understanding and appreciation of what my ancestors did, what what happened in history, but also an acceptance of others. And an appreciation of what others have been through. And okay, being an Anglo guy in South Texas, and growing up in the 50s and 60s, the cultures were more divided than they are nowadays, and so to see this. To see this more blending and experiencing that, I think that that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I like when we can get to a point where we can appreciate the differences. I heard there was a speech teacher of mine in college that she said we were a melting pot, and I said I don't like that term because that means you lose the uniqueness of the ingredients. I prefer a salad, where you can taste the tomato, you can taste the carrots and the lettuce, and you can taste everything, and it all complements each other, to where we can see the different cultures and the beauty of each culture and be able to appreciate it. I was sitting next to a gentleman today at a conference, and they were doing a song, and he was clapping. He was an African American brother, was sitting next to me, and he starts clapping, and it just does something to me to see. I'm sure it's not across the board, but an African American clap and to a certain beat. In other words, he's hearing something that I cannot hear. And I'm over here just being amazed at his clap. And I mentioned to him, I love the way you clap. And he kind of shared with me about the culture and in the blood, but that now it kind of almost translates to other cultures as well, where they pick up on some of the strengths of other cultures.
Okay, and on that note, you know, picking from different cultures and everything. Okay, and like here in Texas, you know. Okay, music and we'll say here in South Texas, you know, in the deep roots of Tejano music.
It's German music.
It's German music, yeah. And now, years ago, I used to spend time in South Louisiana. And, you had to have an accordion. Well, you know, same thing down here, you know. And so, it's a blending of all this stuff, you know. And
it creates something different, right? Like a different culture, you know? And I think that's been the case from the beginning of time. There's cultures that are evolving and just springing into different new culture.
But then even today, you have these old cultures that will not accept the others.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
And we have wars, you know. But I used to have a real close friend there in Alice, and she had a long history, local history in her family. And so one time for a birthday, she gave me a book, and it was The Healer of Los Olmos. It was about the curandera Don Pedrito. And okay, so I get this book and I'm reading about it. Man, there's a chapter in there about one of my great uncles that I knew as a kid. And I'm going, oh my gosh. You know, and so he had gotten sick, and they sent for a prescription from Don Pedrito, and it cured him. Well, lo and behold, 80-something years later, a very, very similar situation. I became sick the same way. And so I said, well, man, if it's good enough for Uncle Zach, it's good enough for me. It didn't work.
Well,
it made things worse.
You know, as believers and Christians, there's stuff in our culture that needs to be dealt with as well. Like we've grown up with certain aspects of our culture that are actually detrimental to us. And you pick up stuff all over the place. And obviously, again, as I say, as a believer, I tell our people, before you're anything, you're Christian. You have to be a believer, because our cultures, they're coming from places that perhaps didn't know God, and they were operating off of different belief systems and that kind of stuff. So you have that, whereas we have to be also adapting and taking things, situating and fixing a culture. Like, for instance, my great-grandpa, they became believers because one of my mom's uncles was coming into town here in Robstown on horseback, and he heard music. He thought it was a dance. So he goes and stops by, and it was a church. So he gets saved, and he goes back and tells the family and brings some of the family members. It was 10 kids. And eventually, my great-grandpa comes to church, and he brings the whole family, and they all get saved. They all give their lives to Christ. He becomes a pastor. So my great-grandpa was a pastor of a church here in Robstown. They founded that church. There's a picture that we have where he's they're at the Nueces River, and he's by the river, and they're baptizing some people with a rope, and there's tons of people all over the place. And my mom and my aunts and stuff, they can recognize their cousins and everybody that's by that river, baptizing some people, changing the culture as God is giving them revelation to who he is and drawing them near to him. So before my great-grandpa, I don't know anybody from there. But from my great-grandpa this way, there's Grammy Award winners, there's pastors, there's worship leaders, there's attorneys, there's doctors, there's some of my cousins have played in the World Series, there's ball players, there's all kinds of a variety of blessing that has come from my great-grandpa down when he chose to put his trust and his faith in Christ. So even though perhaps our past could be negative, it's like you say, you allow those things to teach you and to allow God to take us into better directions.
The Lord and the Holy Spirit, they work in mysterious, miraculous ways.
Yes, sir. And I believe that he works through what the gift he's given you. We met the other day, and I was just like captivated by whenever you would share a story, and even tonight as you share, like it's like it stops time and it takes you to another place. And like I said, I think it drops guards and God is able to do whatever he wants to do. What is the most impacting story or poem that you've recited that you feel has left the biggest mark on people when you share it?
Boy, that's kind of, I can't say exactly which one, but I know ones that have touched people because they've touched me, and if it touched me, it's going to touch somebody else. But one I came across was it could relate to the trail home. The day will come when I'll get a call from the range boss on high to draw my pay and pack my gear and tell the boys goodbye. I'll catch old Dunn from out the bunch and set my saddle on, then cinch her down and step aboard and start the trail home. The trail will lead me past the life I chose to live down here, but I wonder, will it be lined with pards that nod and cheer as I go by? Or will I see the ones I never helped, nor gave kindly word when the opportunity was there? Oh, I'd like to think I'd done my best as I headed up the trail, that I did whatever needed done come snow or sun or hail, that no one thought me shy on sweat, nor afraid to take a stand, that all the boys would say of me, he made a right fair hand. The trail will take a turn or two, and then I'll see ahead some markers on the side, revealing all I did while I was here below, a breathing mortal man. And I hope the marker showing good will help offset the bad. Some will mark the time I helped a friend who called, like when Curly got all busted up before shipping in the fall, or when the Bairds were short on cash and we held us a roping to help raise the funds they needed for the note the bank was holding. But some I'd be ashamed for anyone to see, the things I'd done when all my thoughts were taken up with me. Like knowing how the boss's son had give his life for folks, yet the few I told that they might know the peace such knowing holds. One marker post to list the names of those I didn't tell, all tallied up and sorted, with most gone on to hell, to wrangle Satan's horses throughout eternity, while here I sit, headed home, where they will never be. And when the trail ends at the range on high, and I, hello the camp, and those few I thought to tell invite me to chuck, and the boss's son nods for me to sit. Will the camp be shy on hands for what I never did? Well, I reckon until the range boss calls and I take that final trail, there's work I best be doing to make my ride worthwhile, to pass the word about his son who's signing on a crew, to help find a few more strays before the gather's through.
Mr. Klatt, you say you didn't write any of these, and I believe that God gave some to write and some to tell them. And perhaps many of the ones who wrote them would never be able to tell them the way you did and the way you have and the way you are. So on that, I just want to thank you for joining me in the den. It's been a blessing. And I pray that the people that are watching and listening are just as blessed as I was. So thank you for joining me in the den.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is one of my favoriteest poems to tell. It's based on a true story. In 1874, an Englishman by the name of Frank Dupree came to Texas, went to work on a cattle ranch, and after several years, he returned to England. In 1882, a British magazine published his poem, Alaska. It found its way back to Texas, and it's been recited everywhere from college classrooms to county fairs to campfires and everywhere in between. It goes like this. It's all very well to write reviews, to carry umbrellas and keep dry shoes, to say what everyone else is saying here and to wear what everyone else must wear. But tonight I'm sick of the whole affair. I want free life and I want fresh air. And I sigh for the canter after the cattle, the crack of the whips like shots in battle, the melee of hooves and horns and heads that wars and wrangles and scatters and spreads. For the green beneath and the blue above, for dash and danger and life and love. And Alaska used to ride on a mouse gray Mustang close to my side. In blue serape and bright belled spur, I laughed with joy as I looked at her. Little she knew of books and creeds, and Ave Maria sufficed her needs. And little she cared, save to be by my side, to ride with me and ever to ride from San Saba's shores to the Lavaca's tide. She was as bold as the billows that beat. She was as wild as the breezes that blow. From her little head to her little feet, she was swayed in her suppleness to and fro with each gust of passion. A sapling pine that grows on the edge of a Kansas bluff that wars with wind when weather is rough is like this Alaska, this love of mine. She would hunger that I might eat. Take the bitter, leave me the sweet. But once, when I made her jealous for fun, it's something I whispered or looked or done. One Sunday in San Antonio to a glorious girl at the Alamo, she drew from her garter a little dagger, and sting of the wasp, it made me stagger. An inch to the left or an inch to the right, and I shouldn't be maundering here tonight. But she sobbed, and sobbing so quickly bound her rebozo about the wound, I swiftly forgave her. Scratches don't count in Texas, down by the Rio Grande. Her eyes were brown, a deep, deep brown. Her hair was darker than her eyes, and something in her smile and frown, curved crimson lips and instepped eyes, showed that there ran in each blue vein, mixed with a milder Aztec strain, a vigorous vintage of old Spain. She was alive in every limb, with feelings to the fingertips. And when the sun is like a fire, in the sky one shining soft sapphire, one does not drink in little sips. So why did I leave the fresh and the free that suited her and suited me? Listen a while and you shall see. But one thing to be sure on earth and in air, God and God's laws are everywhere. And Nemesis comes with a foot that's fleet on the Texas Trail as on Regent Street. The air was heavy. The night was hot. I sat by her side and forgot the herd that were taking their rest, forgot the night air was close so pressed, that the Texas norther comes sudden and soon in the dead of night or the blaze of noon, and once let a herd take their breath in fright, nothing on earth can stop their flight. And woe to the rider and woe to the steed that falls in front of that mad stampede. Was that thunder? No, by the cord I swung to my saddle, and she swung behind, away on a hot chase down the wind. Never was fox hunt half so hard, and never was steed so little spared, for we rode for our lives. You shall hear how we fared in Texas down by the Rio Grande. The Mustang flew, and we urged him on. There's one chance left, and you have but one. Halt, jump to the ground, shoot your horse, and crouch under his carcass. And if the steers in their frantic course don't beat you both to pieces at once, you can thank your stars. But if not, goodbye to the quickening kiss and the long-drawn sigh in the open air, in the open sky, in Texas, down by the Rio Grande. The herd was gaining on us, and just as I felt for my old six-shooter behind in my belt, down came the Mustang, and down came we, clinging together. And what was the rest? A body that spread itself on my breast, two arms that shielded my dizzying head, two lips that hard on my lips were pressed. Then came the sound of thunder into my ears, as over us surged a sea of steers, blows that beat blood into my eyes. And at last, when I could rise, Alaska was dead. I gouged out a grave a few feet deep, and there, in the earth's arms, I laid her to sleep. And there she's lying, and no one knows. And the summer shines, and the winter snows. And for many a day the flowers have spread a pall of petals over her head. And the little gray hawk floats aloft in the air, and the sly coyote trots here and there. And the black snake slides and glitters and glides into the rift of a cottonwood tree. And the buzzard sails on, he comes and is gone, stately and still, like a ship at sea. And I wonder why I do not care for things that are like the things that were. Does half my heart lie buried there in Texas, down by the Rio Grande?
Thank you so much.